The tractor was a 1987 John Deere 4255 that Daniel Croft had rebuilt twice and kept running through stubbornness alone. The front left tire showed a slow leak he had been meaning to fix since November. The fuel gauge read a quarter tank when it was actually closer to a fifth. The sending unit had been lying for 11 years, and Daniel knew the difference by feel. The way a farmer learns to read his machines the way a doctor reads a pulse. Through proximity, repetition, the slow accumulation of knowledge that comes from paying attention to the same thing every day for decades. He throttled back, turned the cab heat down 2 notches, and looked out across the northeast field. By the end of this story, I'm also going to share something special with those of you who stick around to the end, something that can help you in your personal life. But first, let's get back to 40 acres of old pasture grass, volunteer wheat, and a few scrub cedar that had crept in from the fence line over the years. The most fertile ground on the property, according to the county soil survey he had pulled 3 winters back when he was trying to convince himself there was still a path forward. South-facing, gentle slope, good clay loam with adequate drainage into the Cimarron tributary that cut the property's eastern border. His grandfather had owned this piece of Oklahoma since 1948 and had never once turned a plow to this particular field. Neither had Daniel's father. Neither had Daniel, across 31 years of farming, what Walter Croft had left behind. The instruction in the deed was handwritten, brief, and offered no explanation. The northeast 40 acres is never to be turned. This is not superstition. This is obligation. Daniel had respected that instruction the way he had respected everything Walter left, not because he understood it, but because Walter had not been a man who spoke without reason. He had never met his grandfather. Walter Croft died in the spring of 1963, 2 years before Daniel was born, at 41 years old in the bedroom of this same farmhouse, of a stomach cancer that his doctor said moved faster than most. Daniel knew Walter only through the artifacts scattered around the property and through his father's sparse, careful recollections, the kind of remembering a man does when the person he is remembering occupied a role that was larger than can be explained in casual conversation. Carl Croft had spoken of his father with a reverence that touched on religious and a reticence that touched on fear. He said Walter came back from the war different, which was true of many men, but apparently more specifically and visibly true of Walter than of most. He said Walter spent years writing letters that went nowhere and sending money to addresses in New York and Chicago and other cities, money that could not be well accounted for from what a Kingfisher County wheat farm produced. He said Walter was a good man who carried something he was not able to put down, and that you honored a man like that by not picking through what he carried. Carl died in 1998 without ever explaining what he meant. He was 4 months behind on the banknote, $280,000 at 7.2% with Citizens Bank of Enid, and they had stopped being patient in February. The morning he made the decision to plow, the kitchen table was covered in papers the way it always was by mid-April. The bank's form letters occupied the top of the stack. 3 of them, each one a degree warmer in tone than the one before it, the last using the word foreclosure proceedings in the second paragraph rather than the fourth, which was either progress or the opposite, depending on how you looked at it. Below those were the input cost estimates for the season. Seed at $68 per acre for the winter wheat ground, fertilizer up again for the 3rd consecutive year, the fuel bill from the co-op that he had been paying in partial installments since Christmas. Below those, the grain contracts he had not been able to fill the previous fall because the combine cylinder had thrown a bearing in September and the repair had cost $4,200 he had borrowed from a line of credit that was now also overdue. Daniel sat with his coffee going cold beside him and added the numbers one more time. Not because the result changed, but because there was comfort in the ritual of checking. A man in a broken elevator might keep pressing the button for the lobby floor. It does not help, but the motion of it does something for the nerves. $1,847 in checking. $41,000 available on paper in the operating line, but the bank had frozen draws pending a financial review that had been ongoing since January. He had not pushed hard on it, because he already knew what the review would find. He was 57 years old. He had farmed the Croft ground his entire adult life. He farmed first alongside his father until Carl died of a heart attack in the spring of 1998, standing in the grain bin with his hand on a shovel, which was as Oklahoman a death as Daniel could imagine, and then alone after Carol left with Anna in 2015, fed up with the poverty and the silence and what she called the inertia. The way Daniel refused to consider selling or restructuring or doing anything different from what Carl and Walter had done before him. She was not wrong. He had known she was not wrong even then. Watching the truck pull out of the driveway on a Sunday evening in October, feeling the particular shame of a man who understands his own failure and cannot correct it anyway. The farm was 480 acres total. He had been forced to sell 2 parcels in the previous decade. The South 80, bought by a neighbor for $1,100 per acre in 2017 to settle a particularly bad operating year, and then the West 40 in 2021, sold to a pipeline easement at rates that sounded generous until the lawyers took their share. The remaining ground he worked every season and worked hard, but grain prices had not cooperated, weather had not cooperated, and the machinery was at the age where repairs arrived in clusters, each one more expensive than the last, each one draining reserves that had nothing left to drain. The Northeast 40 sat there every morning when he looked out the kitchen window. Best soil on what was left of the property. South-facing, good drainage, close to the creek. Under current contract prices in Kingfisher County, 40 acres of wheat ground could reasonably gross $24,000 to $30,000 in a decent year, depending on yields and the July market. That was not enough to solve everything, but it was enough to get to the next season. Walter had left the instruction in writing, in the deed, in his own handwriting, in 1948. But Walter had been dead for 62 years. The instruction had never been explained. Carl had said only that his father was not a man you questioned, and Daniel had taken that at its word. Across 31 years of farming around 40 acres that never produced anything because he had been told not to farm it by a man he never knew. He picked up his jacket and went out to start the tractor. The John Deere's engine turned over on the 3rd crank. He let it warm up for 10 minutes, watching the temperature gauge climb, then dropped the 6-bottom plow and drove toward the fence line that bordered the Northeast 40. He stopped at the gate. The wind came from the northwest at a steady 8 or 10 miles per hour, the kind of constant April wind that was as much a part of central Oklahoma as red clay and the smell of rain on dry ground. Meadowlarks were working the fence posts along the south edge of the field. Everything was ordinary. It was an ordinary morning on an ordinary failing farm in April. He opened the gate and drove through. The soil in the Northeast 40 turned different almost immediately. Darker, heavier, with the particular density of ground that had never been cultivated, never open to air and weather. It came up clean and rich in the plow wake, and looking at it, Daniel felt the frustration of a farmer who has watched good ground go fallow for reasons he does not understand. Walter had known this was good ground. He had known it in 1948 and had fenced it off regardless. Whatever the decision had been, it was not agricultural. He had been 3 hours into the work, nearly halfway through the first northward pass, when the plow blade caught. The sound was wrong. Not the dull clunk of buried rock, which Daniel had heard thousands of times and knew the way a musician knows an off note. This was metallic, a high brief tone that cut through the engine noise and was gone before he could fully register it. He felt it more than heard it, a jolt through the hydraulic lines that went up through his forearms and into his shoulders. He lifted the plow, cut the throttle, and sat there listening to the diesel idle down to quiet. He climbed down into the cold April air and walked back to where the blade had caught. The soil was torn open, dark at depth, and when he crouched and pushed his hand in, working by feel the way you do when your eyes cannot reach where your fingers can, they closed around something cold and thin. A chain. Brass, corroded green, the links heavy enough to be military issue. He pulled it free from the disturbed soil and wiped it against the front of his jacket, and he read the stamped letters on the tag at the end of it. Croft, Walter J., U.S. Army 12,188,643 blood type, A+ Protestant. He stayed crouched in the broken dirt for a long time. Then he started digging with his bare hands. A foot deeper, in soil that had clearly been disturbed at some point in the distant past and packed back with deliberate care, he found the second chain. He had known it would be there before his fingers touched it. The Army issued them in pairs, one worn around the neck and one laced into the left boot, so that if the body was found in pieces there was still a way to identify the man. He pulled the second tag free. Identical information on the front. On the back, someone had used something sharp and patient to scratch letters into the soft brass. The scratches had been worn by 6 decades of soil pressure, but he held the tag at angle to the pale April sun and read, "They are not forgotten. Look below." He sat back on his heels in the dirt and looked at those words for a long time. The meadowlarks were still working the fence posts along the far edge of the field. The John Deere sat behind him with the patient indifference of machinery that has no opinion about what its operator discovers. Daniel drove home without replacing the plow where it had lifted. He left the equipment in the field, which he had not done in his adult farming life, and he drove to the farmhouse, and he put the 2 tags on the kitchen table alongside the bank letters, and he sat with all of it in front of him for the better part of an hour. His grandfather had buried his own dog tags in the one field he had forbidden anyone to touch. He had scratched a message on the back of one before putting it in the ground. He had done this before dying at 41 years old of a cancer that moved fast and left no time for explanations. Whatever Walter Croft had needed to say, whatever explanation might have accompanied that handwritten instruction in the deed, he had taken it with him in 1963, 59 years before Daniel sat at this table with the evidence of it between his palms. Except apparently he had not. "Look below," the tag said. Daniel called Anna at 9 that night. She picked up after 3 rings, her voice carrying the slight tightness of someone working late. Anna was a paralegal at Donovan and Marsh, a civil litigation firm in Tulsa, and she kept hours that made Daniel's 4:30 mornings seem reasonable. She was 32, sharp, organized, and had inherited Carol's jaw and Daniel's tendency toward stubbornness in equal measure. She was engaged to a man named Kyle who sold commercial real estate and had, in Daniel's limited experience of him, a confident opinion about everything and a genuine feeling for nothing. He told her what he had found. There was a pause on the line. "That's strange, Dad. There's something scratched on the back of one." He read it to her. "They are not forgotten. Look below." A longer pause. He buried his own dog tags. "In the one field he told us could never be plowed." "What do you think it means?" "I think he buried something out there. I think that's what the instruction was about. Not superstition, not sentiment. He put something in the ground before he died and left it for whoever came next." He paused. "I need you here, Anna, before I do anything else." She was quiet for a moment, measuring the inconvenience of the request against what the request actually was. He did not push. He had learned not to push with Anna. "I can come Thursday," she said. "Come Wednesday." "Dad, your great-grandfather buried his own dog tags in a field he spent his whole life telling us never to touch, and he scratched a message on them. Come Wednesday." She came on Wednesday evening, pulling into the driveway in her Subaru just as the last light left the sky. In the 2 days before she arrived, Daniel went back to the field each morning before the sun was fully up. He brought a steel probe, a 3-foot section of half-inch rebar sharpened at one end, and worked a grid outward from where he had found the tags, pushing the rod into the earth at 2-foot intervals and listening to what it told him. Most pushes went through cleanly. A few hit rock. Then, about 15 feet north of the initial find and 4 feet from the eastern fence line, the probe went down through soft topsoil and stopped against something that rang back through the metal rod and into his palm with a hollow, resonant sound. Not stone, not hardpan, something fabricated, something built. He mapped it, drove back to the farmhouse for more rebar sections, and returned, marking each hit with a short stake, walking the pattern again and again until the shape of the thing beneath him resolved out of the data. A rough rectangle, 12 to 15 feet wide, closer to 20 feet in length, at a depth that varied between 3 and 5 feet. Something significant, something intentional. He called the county extension office and borrowed their ground-penetrating radar unit. He told Ted Bosworth, the extension agent, that he thought he might have an old irrigation line down there that did not appear on any current survey. Ted loaned it without question, the way neighbors loan things to men they have known for 20 years. The GPR readout confirmed what the probe had suggested, with more precision. A clear void, man-made, containing objects that registered as dense and orderly. Not scattered debris, not geological formation, but arranged material, organized by someone who knew what they were doing and why they were doing it. He returned the radar unit to Ted and said nothing about what the readout had shown. Those 2 days between finding the tags and Anna's arrival were the strangest of Daniel's farming life, and he had had some strange days across 31 years on this ground. He went about his normal work in the mornings, filling the slow-leak tire, greasing the plow bearings, checking the winter wheat on the south sections, and did it all with the sensation of a man who has discovered that the floor beneath him is different from what he had always believed it to be. He looked at the farmhouse in the evenings from across the yard and thought about his grandfather building this place, buying this ground, living here for 15 years with something sealed in the northeast field and the weight of it present in every season. He thought about Carl growing up in this house and never knowing. He thought about what it would take to carry a thing like that alone for 18 years, to write letters that went nowhere and keep trying anyway, and then finally to seal it all back in the ground and write the only message that remained available to you, that the people who had been wronged were not forgotten, and that someone else would have to finish it. The morning before Anna arrived, as Daniel was walking back toward the farmhouse from his second round with the probe, a vehicle he did not recognize turned off the county road and came up his drive. A black SUV, clean, the kind of vehicle that did not belong in Kingfisher County in April. The man who stepped out was in his mid-50s, wearing a fleece vest over a collared shirt, carrying nothing, hands visible, the deliberate body language of someone trained to seem non-threatening. He introduced himself as Rathburn Holloway, said he represented Western Continental Energy Partners, said he hoped he was not interrupting anything. He was friendly in the way of someone for whom friendliness is a professional instrument rather than a natural condition, and he had done his research because he knew Daniel's name without being told it and knew roughly how long the Croft family had farmed this ground. Western Continental was always looking, Holloway said, for properties where a willing seller and a motivated buyer could find a mutual benefit. He had done some preliminary assessments of Daniel's acreage and believed it might have real value for energy development. Nothing certain yet, still early stages. But if Daniel had any interest in a conversation about a right of first offer arrangement, the kind of thing that cost nothing but could pay significantly if and when the time came, and he would be glad to sit down over coffee. "What acreage are you looking at?" Daniel said. Holloway's expression did not change. "The northeast portion of your property would be particularly promising from our preliminary survey work. Good position relative to existing infrastructure in the area." Daniel said he was not interested in selling. Holloway left a card and said the offer stood. No pressure, just a conversation whenever Daniel was ready. After the black SUV was gone, Daniel stood in the driveway holding the card. Western Continental Energy Partners, the text read. Rathburn Holloway, Regional Acquisitions Director. The card was heavy stock, the kind that cost money to print. He had farmed this property for 31 years without an energy company calling on him once. In 31 years, not one approach, not one letter, not one conversation about mineral rights or development potential. And now, 2 days after he had probed the northeast field and borrowed a GPR unit through the county extension office through official county channels, a man in a clean SUV had appeared at his gate specifically interested in the northeast portion. He put the card in his jacket pocket and went inside. Anna arrived at dusk, and he showed her the tags before she had her coat off. She picked them up carefully, turned them over, read both sides with the focused attention she brought to legal documents. "They are not forgotten," she read aloud. "Who are they?" "I don't know yet. Come to the attic." The attic held boxes that had been there since Carl's death in 1998. Cardboard boxes marked in Carl's handwriting. Taxes 1970s, household, dad's things. There was also a metal trunk with a hasp lock that had rusted open years ago. Daniel had been up here a handful of times over the decades for specific things. Insurance records, the old deed abstract, once when a leaking roof had required moving everything away from the north wall. He had never gone through Walter's trunk. Carl had put it in the attic when Walter died, and it had stayed there, a metal box of things Carl had preserved without examining, because that was how Carl handled his grief, through preservation rather than confrontation. The trunk opened with the pressure of a screwdriver against the rusted hasp. Inside, the smell of cedar and age. Folded on top, with military precision, was Walter's dress uniform, olive wool, the creases still sharp after more than 6 decades. His discharge papers. A purple heart in its case, which Daniel had not known existed. 3 letters on the letterhead of the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, postmarked New York, 1951 and 1953. The earliest acknowledged Mr. Croft's inquiry and regretted that without more specific documentation, the committee could not assist in locating the families he had described. The second letter, 2 years later, was warmer in tone but reached the same conclusion. A photograph Daniel had never seen before. 6 men in army uniforms, young, standing before what appeared to be a mine entrance cut into a hillside in European countryside. Walter was among them, recognizable from the mantle photograph downstairs, the same jaw and the same set of the shoulders, younger here, but unmistakable. Written on the back in pencil, in Walter's handwriting. Altensteig Salt Mine, April 14, 1945. Brothers. A letter in German, 3 pages long, formal and careful. And at the bottom of the trunk, wrapped in a faded t-shirt and secured with twine that crumbled when he unwound it, a composition notebook. Dark blue cover, the dime store variety from an era when a dime bought something. Inside, Walter's handwriting, begun on the first page without title or preamble, the way a man begins writing when he is dying and knows he has no time for approach. Anna sat on the attic floor and read it while Daniel washed her face. My name is Walter James Croft of Kingfisher County, Oklahoma. I am writing this in December of 1962, and I expect I will be dead before spring. The cancer is in my stomach and spreading, and the doctors are honest men, which means the news they give me is honest, and the news is not good. My son Carl does not know what I have hidden in the northeast field. My wife Frances died in 1958 without knowing. No one alive knows what I took from a salt mine near Altensteig, Germany, on the 14th of April in 1945. I am writing this because a man does not have the right to take a secret of this nature to his grave. Someone must finish what I could not. The notebook went on for 37 pages in Walter's careful, somewhat labored handwriting, the handwriting of a man who had not written much beyond necessity, but understood that what he was writing now required precision. He had taken pains with it. The letters were deliberate, each line measured, as though he were constructing a legal document for a court he would never appear before. His squad had been moving with the 89th Infantry Division's advance through central Germany in the final weeks of the war. By April 1945, the Reich was collapsing faster than Allied command could track it. German soldiers were surrendering in hundreds, SS officers were burning documents in open fields, and units on the ground were moving ahead of their supply lines through hill country where nobody had updated maps. In that particular chaos, Walter's 5-man squad had come upon a mine entrance outside the village of Altensteig while pursuing retreating soldiers through wooded terrain. The entrance had been recently sealed with timber and packed earth, hastily done by men in a hurry. They opened it because they were young men in a war that was almost over and no one was watching, and young men in that position opened things. The mine was not large. 1 main tunnel, 2 side chambers. In the second chamber, 40 feet back from the entrance, was a cache that had been assembled with care by people who expected to return for it and had not been given the opportunity. Wooden crates on wooden pallets. Gold bars in the first crates, stamped with the Reichsbank eagle. Currency in canvas bags, Swiss francs, dollars, sterling. Loose jewelry in smaller bags. Watches, rings, eyeglass frames made of gold, earrings, items that had been removed. From people, by people who kept records of everything. A locked file cabinet that Raymond Heffler, the squad's one college-educated man and a high school mathematics teacher from Milwaukee before the draft found him, pried open with a bayonet. Inside, ledgers in German, folders of documents, and photographs. Hundreds of family photographs. We were not educated men, Walter wrote. We were farm boys and factory workers, and Raymond, who had taught high school mathematics in Milwaukee for 4 years before the draft. Raymond could read German, and he translated for us from the ledgers while we stood in that mine with our rifles and our muddy boots. He read us names. Names of families. Names of towns. Columns of assets recorded in the language of inventory and administration. What had been taken, who it had been taken from, when it had been removed. We had heard things in those weeks, things that were beginning to come out in the newspapers and in the briefings and in the faces of the people we encountered as we moved east through Germany. We understood what we were looking at. These were the possessions of people who had been killed. Every single piece in that mine had belonged to a person who was dead. They reported the mine to command. An officer arrived the next day with a team to secure and formally catalog the site. The mine was processed through the standard Allied recovery operation, photographed and inventoried and locked and transferred up the chain. That was the official record. But before the officer arrived, The 5 men had made a different decision. Each took what he could carry without obvious detection. A standard Reichsbank bar weighed 27 pounds. Carrying more than a few was physically impractical and conspicuous. Walter took 6 bars, wrapped in his field blanket. The other 4 men took comparable amounts. Raymond Heffler took the contents of the file cabinet, every ledger and photograph and document, on the grounds that he could read them and the rest could not. The reason, Walter was careful to establish, was not greed. He returned to this point in the notebook 3 times, as though aware he would not be present to argue it, and the written record needed to be unambiguous. They took those assets because Raymond had translated the ledgers, and they understood that the official recovery process did not prioritize returning property to survivors. What was recovered went into allied accounting structures, into reparations frameworks, into governmental processes that displaced and impoverished and traumatized survivors rarely navigated successfully. Walter had spent 3 years watching the army absorb everything it encountered and deliver little of it back to the people it had been stripped from. He did not trust the institution. He believed that 5 men holding those assets and those documents and seeking the families directly and personally, without bureaucracy between them and the people they were trying to reach, would deliver something real that the government would not. He spent 18 years trying. He learned basic Yiddish and German from a dictionary he ordered from a bookstore in Oklahoma City. He wrote letters to the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, the Jewish Agency, the United Restitution Organization. He sat at the kitchen table of this same farmhouse on winter evenings, Daniel thought, composing letters in language he was still learning to the organizations whose job it was to locate the displaced and the surviving, asking for help he could not fully explain without revealing what he had done. He sent money when he could trace a recipient to a current address. Not gold, because selling Reichsbank bars in 1950s Oklahoma would have raised questions he could not answer, but cash, savings, money the farm could not spare. He made direct contact with 3 families: the Altman family from Schwabisch Hall, the Grunfeld family from Heidelberg, a widower named Isaac Bergman from Ulm who had survived the war alone. To each of them, he returned something, the equivalent of roughly 2 bars worth, converted quietly over the years through a jeweler in Enid who asked no questions about the origin of the gold he brought in paper bags. The rest he could not deliver. Raymond Heffler died in a car accident in 1957, his copies of the ledgers stored in a filing cabinet in his garage in Milwaukee. His widow found them, could not read German, did not know what they were, and stored them with his other belongings. Walter had his own copies of the most critical materials, but lacked the language fluency to work through them fully. The organizations that might have helped were suspicious of an Oklahoma farmer who could not explain his source without implicating himself in the theft from the mine. The government agencies were worse. And by 1962, Walter James Croft was dying of stomach cancer at 41 years old, and the task had not been completed, and the bulk of what he had taken, for gold bars he estimated, plus Raymond's documentation and his own copies, remained in the chamber he had built in the northeast field in the late summer of 1948, the year he bought the farm. I could not do this, the notebook said, near its final pages. I was not equal to what I set myself to do, and I am sorry for that in ways I cannot find the words for. But the gold is not mine, and the documents are not mine, and they have been waiting for the right people for 17 years. Whoever finds this, the names are there. Find them. Tell them Walter Croft of Kingfisher County, Oklahoma, knew their names and carried them and could not put them down and could not deliver them where they belonged. Tell them someone tried. Tell them they were not forgotten. Anna set the notebook down on the attic floor between them. She sat with her hands in her lap and looked at nothing in particular for almost a full minute. When she spoke, her voice was steady with the effort it took to make it so. How much gold does he say is down there? 4 bars. He says 4 remaining. He took 6. He returned the equivalent of 2 over 18 years. She was thinking through it the way she thought through case documents. 4 bars. The standard Reichsbank bar was approximately 400 troy ounces. Gold is sitting around $2,200 per ounce right now. Before we find out what happened next in the story, I want to take a brief moment to speak directly to anyone watching who might be going through their own sudden, overwhelming transition. If you are navigating a bitter divorce, the loss of a spouse, or a financial shock, you know the hardest part isn't just the money. It's not knowing what to do first. That is exactly why we created the Phoenix Blueprint. It is a practical, step-by-step guide for starting over. It doesn't have fluffy affirmations or vision boards. It is a tactical survival manual. It gives you the exact checklist for the first 48 hours, including the one rule you must follow. Do not make any decision you cannot reverse. It includes the Found Money worksheet, showing you exactly how to check state databases because 1 in 7 Americans actually has unclaimed money waiting for them right now. It even gives you word-for-word boundary scripts to use when family members pressure you for money or try to make decisions for you. You can get the entire guide right now for just $17. If you're watching on your TV, just pull out your phone, open your camera, and scan the QR code on the screen right now. If you're on a computer or phone, click the top link in the description. You don't have to figure this out alone. Now, let's get back to the story. She paused. 4 bars is just under 3.5 million. If it's 4 bars. She looked at him. I walked the probe across that field for 2 mornings, he said. The void is bigger than what 4 gold bars and a file box of documents would fill. The radar showed multiple dense zones. The rectangle I mapped out is at least 200 square feet of chamber space. For bars and some folders don't fill 200 square feet. He held her gaze. He was writing that notebook while he was dying of stomach cancer. He might not have had the strength to go out and inventory what was in the ground. He might have underestimated. Or Raymond Heffler might have given him more than the notebook accounts for before that car accident in 1957. Anna picked up the photograph of the 6 men at the mine entrance. She studied their faces, young and tired, standing in front of something they had just opened, squinting in the April light of 1945. The documents, she said. The ledgers. If they are what the notebook says, community-level asset registers, family inventories, provenance documentation for identified property, and if those families have living descendants. I looked it up. The major restitution settlements from the last 30 years. German bank restitution. Swiss bank cases. The Holocaust Expropriated Art Recovery Act. Once you aggregate the claims and apply compounded interest calculations across 6 decades, and include what courts have awarded for what they call unjust enrichment, he stopped. The range is large, Anna. How large? If the documentation is solid and the legal claims can be established, the lawyers I read about were discussing figures in the range of $400 to $450 million in aggregate potential claims. The attic was quiet. Outside, the April wind moved across the property with its usual indifference. There was someone here yesterday, Daniel said. He told her about Holloway, the clean SUV, the practiced friendly pitch about a right of first offer, the specific mention of the northeast portion of the property. Anna was still for a long moment. When she spoke, the paralegal's precision was back in her voice, the professional habit of not letting reaction outrun analysis. He came the day after you borrowed the GPR unit through the county extension office. Yes, the extension office is a county agency. County records are semi-public. Someone with the right connections could check what equipment had been checked out and by whom. That's what I thought. She picked up the notebook again and held it carefully. We go out before first light tomorrow morning. Both of us. We document everything we find before a single piece of it moves. Photographs, video, narration, GPS coordinates. Nothing leaves the ground until we know what is actually there. She looked at him steadily. And you do not answer any calls from numbers you don't recognize. They went out at 4:30 the next morning with the sky still dark and the first pale gray of pre-dawn barely visible along the eastern horizon. Anna had her phone set to record video. Daniel brought 2 shovels, a come-along from the equipment shed, the battery lantern, and the zippered bag with Walter's notebook and the photograph and the 2 dog tags, because it felt wrong to leave any part of what Walter had left behind where it might be found without him. The field was cold and still. Their boots left tracks in the light frost forming on the pasture grass at the field's edge. Daniel found the spot by memory, and they started to dig. The topsoil went fast. Below it, at about 2 feet, they hit the timber framing. Old-growth pine boards, 3 inches thick, fitted together at the edges and sealed along the joints with tar that had dried to the consistency of old rubber and cracked when pressed, but had held for 63 years against the slow migration of soil moisture. He photographed each board before the come-along lifted it. Anna kept the video running, narrating in a low, steady voice. The date, the time, the GPS coordinates from her phone, the dimensions of each board as they removed it, the condition of the tar ceiling, the smell of the air below. The smell that rose was contained and mineral, old earth pressed tight against itself, the particular quality of enclosed space that has been held apart from moving air for generations. Below that, a metallic undertone. Machine oil. Daniel lifted the lantern over the opening and looked down. The chamber was deeper than he had estimated from the probe work. 6 feet, maybe a fraction more, walls shored by the same pine timber, floor packed dirt, dry, because the boards and tar had done their work faithfully for more than half a century. And arranged on wooden pallets inside the chamber, raised off the floor to keep them from any ground moisture, were oilcloth-wrapped bundles secured with wire. More bundles than 4 gold bars and a file box would require. Far more. He lowered himself down into the chamber. Anna handed him the lantern and kept the phone recording from above. He unwrapped the first bundle carefully. The oilcloth came apart in stiff layers, intact after all the years, and inside was a gold bar. Rectangular, approximately a foot long, 3 inches thick. The face showed an eagle with spread wings, a wreathed swastika below it, the words Deutsche Reichsbank in block capital letters, and a serial number. He recognized it immediately from Walter's description. He set it on the pallet and unwrapped the next. Gold again, and again. Anna counted from above, her voice controlled and even. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He moved to the second stack. 7, 8, 9. He kept going. 10, 11, 12. He stood among the remaining bundles and looked up at Anna. She was looking down at him with an expression that combined composure and something larger underneath it that composure was working hard to contain. He moved to the third stack. This one was a wooden crate, old, military, stenciled in German. He pried the top loose with the flat end of the shovel. Inside, sorted into folders tied with string, was documentation. A folder tagged with a handwritten label in German, Raymond Heffler's academic handwriting on the covering note in English. Mosbach District Community Register, Assets Inventory, compiled November 1941. Gold bullion, jewelry, bank instruments, cultural property. He understood the English. He did not need the German to understand what he was holding. He opened the second folder. A family photograph. Parents, 3 children, the father in a suit, the mother in a dress with a brooch at the collar. Written on the back in German, then in English below it in the same hand. Altman family, Schwabisch Hall. Assets registered in Volume 4, page 112. He worked through folder after folder. More families, more names, more photographs of people who had once been completely ordinary, standing in gardens, sitting at tables, holding children, looking at the camera with expressions that ranged from formal to amused to slightly impatient with the photographer. And more ledger entries in the language of columns and records. What had been taken, from whom, logged with the particular precision of people who believed the records would serve them when they came to reclaim what they had surrendered. He found a folder that held only a single photograph. A little girl, 8 or 9 years old, standing in a garden somewhere. She was squinting slightly against the sun. She wore a white dress with a dark sash. She looked like every little girl in every garden photograph in the world, completely unremarkable in every detail except that she was specific. She had a name in one of those ledger columns, and a family, and a place, and someone had found it worth recording that she existed. He did not know whether she had survived. He did not know anything about her except this fragment of a summer afternoon, somewhere in Germany, sometime before 1941. He thought about the column in whatever ledger held her family's name, the column that would have read out the items taken from her household in the bureaucratic language of inventory and administration. The china, the silver, the furniture, whatever her parents had owned, all of it reduced to line items in a register maintained by people who believed the records would serve a purpose and had been right about that, just not the purpose they intended. They are not forgotten. He set that folder with the others and kept going through the crate. There were more crates. A second one held additional documentation, legal instruments, property deeds, bank certificates in German he could not read. A third crate, smaller, held objects wrapped individually in cloth. Watches, rings, a small silver figurine. The personal things that had not made it into the columns of an official ledger, but had ended up in the mind nonetheless. When he climbed out of the chamber, the The sun had come fully over the horizon, and the field was lit gold-pink with early morning light. Anna stood with the video still running on her phone, her face very controlled, her eyes very bright. 12 bars, he said. I counted. Her voice was steady. At current spot price, that's between $10 and $11 million. Just in the gold. It's not the gold. I know. She lowered the phone slowly. Those ledgers. If they document what the notebook describes, and from what you're saying they appear to, we're not talking about selling gold bars, Dad. We're talking about establishing provenance for assets seized from identified communities during the Shoah and supporting legal claims that have a 60-year clock of compounded unjust enrichment behind them. She looked at him. I need to call someone. His name is Marcus Webb, a military historian and an expert appraiser who has testified in federal Holocaust restitution cases. I worked adjacent to his office on a case 2 years ago. He will know what we are looking at legally and how to protect it. She paused. We replace the boards. Nothing moves until he gets here. And you don't speak to Holloway or anyone from Western Continental. He nodded. They worked quickly, replacing the boards over the opening, setting stones along the edges. Anna took a final sweep of the field with the video, documenting the disturbed surface, the location, the surrounding landmarks. Evidence of what had been found, preserved on her phone before anything else could happen to it. They were halfway back to the farm truck when they heard a car on the county road. A silver sedan with county plates turned into the drive. A man in his 50s with a county assessor's badge on his lanyard and a clipboard in his hand walked toward them with a practiced casual smile. Mr. Croft, sorry to catch you early. We received a report of unpermitted excavation activity on your property. Routine compliance check. Daniel said nothing. Anna moved forward 2 steps, enough to establish herself as the person the man should be addressing. I'm Anna Croft. I advise my father on legal matters relating to this property. Who filed the report? The man checked his clipboard. Anonymous tip. Yesterday afternoon around 2 o'clock. Yesterday afternoon, Daniel had not been near the field. He had not spoken to anyone about the property. He had not done anything that would generate an anonymous complaint. The only way someone had reported excavation activity was if they were monitoring the property from the road, or if they had prior knowledge of what was being sought and were watching for movement. Your name and badge number, Anna said. She already had her phone out. He gave both. He took Anna's business card from the firm. He said he would be in touch if further inspection was required, and he drove away. Anna watched the silver sedan until it disappeared onto the county road. Then she turned back to Daniel with an expression that had moved past controlled and into something harder. They have reached into the county assessor's office, she said. That is not a coincidence. Someone knew you had that GPR unit out here last week, and they have been watching for movement. She held the phone at her side, still warm from the recording. Think about the timing. You borrowed the radar unit through the county. A county agency. Anyone with the right connection to a county employee could have found that out the same day. And yesterday, while you were inside going through your grandfather's papers, someone was watching from the road and saw enough to make a complaint. She looked at the field, at its unremarkable surface. This is not a casual interest, Dad. Holloway came here the morning after the radar. The county assessor comes the morning after we open the chamber. The sequence is not random. They want the land, Daniel said. They want what's under it. Or they want it out of your hands before you understand what you have. She turned to him. We are behind. We need to get ahead of this today. Daniel looked out across the northeast 40 in the full morning light. The field he had farmed around his entire adult life because a dead man had told him to leave it alone. The field that had been waiting, not for him specifically, but for whoever was next, whoever came with enough desperation or curiosity or simple necessity to finally push a plow through the fence line. He thought about Walter writing those final pages by winter light. I could not do this. I was not equal to it. And meaning it not as an excuse, but as a reckoning, an honest accounting of what he had tried and what had remained unfinished, and the only thing left available to him. Writing it down for someone who had not been born yet, trusting that the ground would hold it until the right person arrived. The obligation, Walter had written in the deed. This is not superstition. This is obligation. Daniel had spent 31 years honoring those words without understanding them. Now he understood them. The question was whether understanding was enough, or whether understanding was only where the work began. He thought about the bank letters on the kitchen table, the 4 months in arrears, the frozen line of credit. The mathematics of a failing farm that had seemed, as recently as yesterday morning, to define the entire scope of his situation. The mathematics had changed. Everything had changed. But the weight of what Walter had written in that notebook, and what those photographs represented, and what the names in those ledgers were still waiting to receive after 63 years. That weight was larger than the mathematics, and it was not going to be resolved by a check from an energy company or a bank settlement or anything else that had nothing to do with what was actually buried in the Northeast 40. "What do we do first?" he said. Anna had her phone out. "We call Marcus Webb. Right now, before Holloway calls you again. Before that county assessor writes his report." She looked at him. "And then we find out who those families are. The names in those ledgers. The people Walter spent 18 years trying to reach. We do what he could not." He looked at the field one more time. The boards were back in place. The ground surface showed nothing. But below it, in a chamber built by a dying 26-year-old in the fall of 1948 with pine timber and tar, and the specific stubbornness of a man who had made a promise and was not yet ready to stop trying to keep it, 12 gold bars, and the documentation of what they had once belonged to were still exactly where Walter Croft had left them. The spring wind moved across the creek and over the turned earth of the Northeast 40, carrying the smell of new soil and all the things that had been held underground for a very long time. They walked back to the truck together. Anna was already dialing. Marcus Webb drove up from Oklahoma City in a pickup truck that had more miles on it than Daniel's John Deere and carried, in a fitted aluminum box in the bed, what appeared to be a portable field office. He arrived on a Friday morning 2 days after Anna's call, parking with the relaxed precision of someone who had spent time in places where parking correctly mattered. He was 54 years old, shorter than Daniel had expected from the voice on the phone, with a beard going gray and the kind of hands that suggested both academic and physical work over a long career. He wore a canvas field jacket with too many pockets, the kind sold at Army surplus stores, and he shook Daniel's hand with a grip that got the measure of a person and then let them go. He had spent 22 years on Holocaust-era asset recovery cases. He had testified as an expert witness in federal court 9 times, consulted on 3 of the largest restitution settlements in the previous decade, and had once located a collection of pre-war Jewish family property in a storage unit in Queens, New York, that had been sitting unsorted since 1952. Before all of that, he had been a military historian at the University of Oklahoma for 8 years, writing a dissertation on post-war property restitution that had taken him to archives in Germany, Austria, and Israel, and had introduced him to a world of missing things whose paper trails had survived even when the people had not. He had left academia when the practical work started calling louder than the theoretical work, which was the decision his tenure committee had been unhappy about, and which Marcus himself had never second-guessed. He had not, Anna told Daniel after the phone call, sounded surprised to hear about the find. He had sounded like a man receiving news he had been expecting for a long time without knowing what form it would take. Standing in Daniel's driveway, he looked at the farmhouse and then at the fields and then at Daniel. "How much did your grandfather tell you in the notebook about what he expected to be in the chamber?" He said 4 bars and the documents. "The documents from Raymond Heffler." "But you found 12. "Yes." Marcus nodded slowly. Raymond Heffler didn't die in 1957 with his copies of the documents in a garage in Milwaukee. Raymond Heffler died in 1957, but his copies of the documents were in a garage in Milwaukee for approximately 3 months before your grandfather collected them. I would bet on it. He looked at the Northeast 40 across the fence line. Walter says in the notebook that he lost track of the other men. That may be true, but the documentation, the ledgers, and the photograph files and the provenance records did not get from Milwaukee to Oklahoma by accident. Raymond knew what he had, and he trusted your grandfather with it before he died. Or your grandfather collected it after. He paused. Your grandfather had more than he let himself account for. That happens. Some men can't look directly at the full weight of what they're carrying. They drove out in Daniel's truck, the 3 of them, the aluminum box from Marcus's bed unloaded and carried between them to the Northeast field. Daniel had replaced the boards again after the first opening, and the stones were still along the edges where he had set them. Marcus walked the ground above the chamber first, slow and deliberate, before they lifted a single board. He took photographs. He noted the dimensions Anna had estimated. He looked at the location relative to the fence line, the field boundary, the drainage toward the creek. He built it well, Marcus said. The orientation is smart, elevated slightly from the surrounding grade, which is why the interior stayed dry. Most men in 1948 burying something in a field would have been thinking about concealment. Your grandfather was thinking about preservation. Those are different priorities. They opened the chamber for the third time in a week. Marcus lowered himself in with a headlamp and a systematic patience that was different from Daniel's urgency and Anna's paralegal precision. He moved through the bundles without rushing, lifting, examining, setting down, moving to the next. He spoke in a low, continuous voice that Anna recorded, describing each item with the technical vocabulary of someone who had cataloged things like this before and understood that the description was itself a form of protection. 12 bars confirmed. For crates of documentation. And then, in a fifth crate that had been stacked behind the documentation crates and that Daniel and Anna had missed in the first visit because they had not gone deep enough into the chamber, something else. Marcus lifted the lid of the fifth crate and was quiet for a moment. "Come down," he said. Daniel lowered himself in and stood beside him. Inside the fifth crate, wrapped individually in oilcloth and packed with the same care as the gold bars, were objects of a different kind. A brass menorah, small, the kind used in a household rather than a synagogue, tarnished but intact. A case for a Torah scroll, silver or silver plate, with decorative work along the crown piece. Several small volumes in Hebrew, their spines worn soft. A pair of candlestick holders, matching, with the specific wear of things used weekly for decades. A child's cup, silver, engraved with a name he could not read. These weren't in the Reichsbank inventory, Marcus said. The German authorities didn't bother listing religious objects in the official registers unless they had obvious commercial value. They took them anyway, but they didn't count them. He lifted the menorah carefully, turning it in the headlamp light. Raymond Heffler understood something about what he was collecting. He didn't just take the inventory documents. He took the things that proved the people were real. The things the ledgers didn't list because the ledgers were only interested in monetary value. He set the menorah down and picked up the child's silver cup, held it at an angle to read the engraved name. A cup like this tells you there was a child in this family who had a specific name and specific parents who had this made for them and used it in their home. The ledger tells you there was a family with accessible assets in column 1 and a total in column 3. The cup tells you something the ledger cannot. Marcus set it back with care. These items are worth almost nothing in monetary terms. In terms of what they mean to the families they came from, there is no calculation that applies. They worked through the full inventory for 4 hours, Marcus dictating and Anna recording, Daniel photographing each item before it was replaced in the crate. By noon, they had a complete catalog of what was in the ground. 12 gold bars totaling approximately 4,800 troy ounces. Documentation folders covering 23 identifiable families from 4 communities in the Mosbach and Heilbronn districts of southwestern Germany, a complete community-level asset register for the Schwabisch Hall Jewish congregation, and the 5th crate of ceremonial and personal items that had never been listed in any official record. Marcus sat on the edge of the open chamber with his notebook on his knee and looked at what they had compiled. "I have been doing this work for 22 years, he said. "I have never seen documentation this intact, and this comprehensive for a find of this size. Most of what surfaces has incomplete provenance, partial records, chains of custody that are disputed or broken. This is 23 families with names, addresses, asset descriptions, and photograph identification. In a single collection, in a single location, documented by a man who understood what he was looking at and organized it with care that suggests he intended for it to be found and used." He paused. "Your grandfather collected everything Raymond had, and he organized it by the families he had come closest to reaching. The Altman folder is on top. That means he made more progress with the Altmans than with anyone else." Daniel had noticed the ordering of the folders on the first visit, but had not understood it. He contacted them. "I think he made contact and did not succeed in completing the delivery. The JDC letters you found in the trunk say they could not assist without more documentation. But your grandfather had documentation. He had Raymond's copy of the ledger pages. He would not have needed the JDC's help to identify the Altmans. He needed help reaching them, tracing a current address, establishing trust across the distance of language and suspicion. Marcus closed his notebook. There is also something in the Altman folder that goes beyond the standard inventory entries. 3 pages of typed German text with the heading Altman Mobile Work, which translates as Altman Furniture Works. The Altmans were not simply a family with household assets seized. They owned a furniture manufacturing company in Schwabisch Hall with production facilities on 2 properties. The Reichsbank register lists only the personal assets taken from the family residence. But these 3 pages document the business assets separately: the factory buildings, the inventory, the machinery, the commercial accounts. Business assets seized under the November 1938 laws that forced Jewish business owners to transfer their companies to non-Jewish ownership at prices set by the state. He looked at Daniel. The restitution claims for seized businesses under those laws are calculated differently from the claims for personal assets. They include the assessed value of the business itself, the income generated by that business in the decades since seizure, and compounded interest. The Altman Company continued operating under German ownership until 1971, when it was sold. The new owners had no idea the original ownership had been taken by force, or at least that is what they would say. He paused. The Altman business claims alone could represent a significant portion of the total restitution figure. This is why the Altman folder was on top. Your grandfather understood what he had found. There is a letter I want to look at. The German letter in Walter's trunk. They went back to the house. Marcus sat at the kitchen table with the 3-page German letter and read it without speaking for several minutes. Outside, the April wind had shifted to the southeast and was pushing cloud cover off the plains toward them, the sky going from blue to gray by degrees. He set the letter down. "This is from Miriam Altman," he said. "Written from Stuttgart in September 1952. She received a letter from your grandfather that summer." He looked at the second page. "She says she does not know whether she can trust what he is telling her. She says many people have claimed to have information about what was taken from her family, most of them wanting money in exchange. She says if he is genuine, he should send her the letter her father wrote in January of 1938. She is testing him. She is asking for something only someone with the actual family documents could provide." Daniel said nothing. He was looking at the letter and thinking about Walter Croft at the kitchen table where Daniel now sat, reading those same words in September 1952 and not knowing enough German to read them without help. Did he respond? He must have, or there would be no second letter. Marcus turned to the 3rd page. This was written in March of 1953. She says he has proven himself. She says she is willing to meet. She gives an address in Chicago where she has emigrated. She says, Marcus stopped. He read the passage again. Then he said it. She says, "Tell me you have not come this far only to give up. My family trusted people before, and they were let down each time. Do not be another one who tried and could not." The kitchen was quiet. Anna had her pen in her hand and was not writing. "He did not go to Chicago," Daniel said. "No. His stomach cancer was diagnosed in 1962. If Miriam wrote that letter in 1953 and he was unable to follow through before 1963, something happened in that decade that stopped him. A failed attempt to liquidate some of the gold for cash to send. A response from Miriam that he could not answer without explaining more than he was able to explain. The impossibility of arriving in Chicago with 27-pound gold bars and a story that began with theft from a mine he should have left alone. We may never know exactly. Marcus closed the folder. What we know is that Miriam Altman survived and came to Chicago and waited for a man in Oklahoma who never arrived. And she raised a family there, and that family is still here. Daniel thought about the decade between Miriam's second letter and Walter's death. 10 years of farming this ground, going out to the northeast field every spring when the land around it was being planted, looking at the grass that covered the boards, knowing what was below and why it was still there. The JDC had said no. The Jewish agency had said no or had not responded or had responded in ways he could not use. Miriam had said come and he had not gone, and each year that passed made the going harder, the explanation more impossible, the weight of the unfinished thing heavier in proportion to the time it had been carried. A man can spend his whole life not quite getting to the thing that matters most. "You can find her descendants," Anna said. "Already sent a query to the WGRO while I was reading." Marcus picked up his phone. World Jewish Restitution Organization. They maintain a registry of surviving families with open claims. If Miriam Altman is in the registry under her name or her family's name from Schwabish Hall, we will have a current contact before this afternoon is out." He was right about the timing. The response came at 3:15. Marcus read it at the kitchen table with Daniel and Anna watching his face for what it would show. He set the phone down. Miriam Altman died in 1987 in Chicago. She had 2 children. One died in 1994. The other, a daughter named Deborah, had 1 daughter. He looked at Daniel. Her name is Hannah Stern. She is 78 years old. She is a retired schoolteacher. She lives on the north side of Chicago. The WJRO has a verified contact address. The name landed in the kitchen the way names do when they represent the moment something abstract becomes specific and human and immediate. Daniel stood at the counter and looked out through the kitchen window at the northeast field. He tried to hold 2 things in his mind at the same time: the child in the white dress in the garden photograph, squinting in the summer sun, and Hannah Stern, 78 years old, a retired schoolteacher in Chicago, who did not yet know that her great-grandmother's name was in a folder in a farmhouse in Oklahoma, or that a farmer who had never met her was standing in that farmhouse kitchen having just learned her name. "When do we contact her?" he said. "Anna should make the call." Marcus looked at her. "You have the legal context and the warmth in your voice for this kind of news. And this is exactly the kind of call that needs both." Anna nodded. "Not today. Tonight. Give me until evening to find the best approach." In the hours before Anna's call, the other matter came into focus. Anna had been on the laptop and her phone for 2 days before Marcus arrived, working a parallel investigation that she had not fully shared with Daniel because she wanted to be certain before she told him. That afternoon, with Marcus at the kitchen table going through the ledger translations, and Daniel hauling feed for the cattle that still needed daily attention regardless of what else was happening on the property, she opened her laptop and pulled up what she had found. She had started with the 1948 deed, which Daniel had located in the attic abstract file. The deed language was standard for the period except for one paragraph that she had read 3 times before fully understanding it. The deed transferred the surface rights and all subsurface rights to Walter James Croft, with the explicit notation that no mineral rights had been leased, assigned, or encumbered, and that the conveyance included the full subsurface estate. This was unusual. Most rural Oklahoma properties sold in 1948 transferred surface and subsurface together as a matter of course, but most sellers and buyers did not think to specify it explicitly. Someone had thought to specify it in Walter's deed. Whether that had been Walter's instruction or a careful attorney's habit, the result was the same. The Northeast 40 carried clean subsurface rights, fully owned, never touched. She had then spent the next morning on the Oklahoma Corporation Commission's public database, which records all oil and gas production in the state. The Foster property to the east of the Croft land had 4 active wells registered to Western Continental Energy Partners. The wells had been drilled between 2013 and 2016, and they produced from the Woodford Shale Formation at approximately 7,000 feet below the surface. Anna had requested the geological survey attachments for each well permit from the OCC's Public Records Office. They arrived the following day. The surveys were dense documents with formation maps and directional drilling coordinates. Anna had spent most of a morning working through them with the help of a geology primer she found through the university library system. The picture that emerged was not ambiguous. The Woodford Formation in this area ran in a broad lens from east to west across multiple property lines. The Foster property wells were vertical for the first several thousand feet and then angled laterally, a technique called horizontal drilling, in order to access the productive zone along its greatest extent. The lateral sections of all 4 wells ran west, onto the Croft property, under the Northeast 40. She had checked the production records for all 4 wells over the full 11 years of operation. Western Continental had been extracting natural gas from the Woodford Formation under land they did not own mineral rights to, through wells drilled from an adjacent property, for 11 consecutive years without ever approaching Daniel Croft about a lease, a royalty arrangement, or any form of authorization. She pulled the extraction volume records and applied current wellhead prices and standard royalty calculations to the numbers. The result was a figure she looked at twice to make sure she had not made an error in the spreadsheet. She found Daniel in the barn and told him. He stood with a feed bucket in each hand and looked at her. $180 million, he said. In extracted value, at current prices, over 11 years. That is the royalty equivalent for what they have taken from under your land without your knowledge or consent. She paused. That is before interest. Before legal penalties for trespass and unauthorized extraction. Before punitive damages, which an Oklahoma jury would be in a position to award given that this was not a mistake. They surveyed this formation. They know exactly where their lateral sections run. They came here with a right of first offer pitch. And a county assessor with an anonymous complaint because they are trying to get ahead of you finding this out. Daniel set the feed buckets down. He looked at his hands, still dirty from the morning's chores. He thought about Holloway in the driveway with his practiced friendliness, specifically naming the northeast portion as the promising acreage, already knowing what was under it and what Daniel's financial position was, and what the gap between those two facts could be made to produce. They have been drilling under this property since 2013, he said. The first permit was filed in 2013. Production started the following year. Anna looked at him carefully. You were behind on the note in 2013 as well. I checked the county records. You took a bridge loan that year after a bad growing season. You have been financially marginal every year since. They have known your position the whole time. They have been waiting for the moment when the pressure was high enough that you would take whatever they offered. He sat down on a hay bale. Outside the barn door, the cloud cover that had been building since noon had thickened to gray, the kind of sky that in April could mean anything from light rain to a significant storm. They came here offering me $280,000, the exact amount of my bank note. Yes, that is not a coincidence. No, someone looked up your public financial records. The note amount is in the county records. They offered you exactly enough to save the farm and walk away. Specifically, so that you would be motivated to take it, and specifically, so that you would not have the time or the resources to investigate further before you did. Anna crouched down so she was at eye level with him. Dad, the mineral rights claim and the restitution claims are separate. One has nothing to do with the other. But combined, they represent a legal position that is very large and very solid. Marcus's expertise is in the restitution side. I can handle the mineral rights side, or find someone who can. But we need to move quickly, because Western Continental clearly knows the situation on their end, and they are already working to contain it. Marcus appeared in the barn doorway, having followed Anna from the house when she went to find Daniel. He had heard enough from the entry to understand what they were talking about. How large is the combined figure? He asked. Anna gave him the number. The mineral rights recovery plus the aggregate restitution claims, before attorney's fees and adjustments. Marcus leaned against the barn door frame and looked at Daniel sitting on the hay bale with his hands on his knees, and the particular expression of a man absorbing a number that is large enough to change the shape of his situation entirely and needs a moment to understand what that new shape will be. Your grandfather hid what he hid in the northeast field because he believed hiding it was the most responsible thing he could do with it, Marcus said. He was not wrong about that. He was one man in 1948 with materials he had taken from a war zone and documentation he could not deliver through any channel he trusted, and he put it in the ground and wrote down everything he knew and hoped someone would find it. He looked out through the barn door at the northeast 40, visible from this angle as a rectangle of different colored soil against the pasture grass. The thing about responsible decisions is that they sometimes take a very long time to pay out. That does not mean they were wrong. Daniel was quiet for a moment. What does $415 million look like in practice? What does it actually change? Marcus considered this the way he considered questions that deserved an honest answer rather than a reassuring one. The restitution settlements are paid primarily to the identified families and their descendants through the claims conference over a period of years. Your role is as the provenance holder, the person who preserved and delivered the evidence. Courts in Germany and the United States will determine the specific distribution. You will not receive the restitution money directly. I wasn't asking about that. The mineral rights recovery is different. That goes directly to you, as the aggrieved mineral rights holder. Trespass recovery in Oklahoma under the circumstances Anna has described, documented over 11 years with evidence of prior knowledge, could conservatively reach $80 to $100 million after legal costs. That number is yours. Marcus let that settle. What it changes, practically speaking, is everything that $100 million changes for a man who is 4 months behind on a $280,000 banknote. The farm stands. The debt is addressed. Everything that was about to be taken from you stays. Daniel looked down at his hands again, dirty with the ordinary work of a day that had nothing to do with any of this. And the restitution? The families? That is what Walter wanted to happen. That has been waiting 63 years to happen. Marcus straightened from the doorframe. Anna should start the call to Washington tonight. Tonight. The sooner the filing is in order, the less time Western Continental has to prepare a preemptive legal strategy. They are already working one. Holloway will not have come here without a backup plan. They went back to the house through the thickening gray of the afternoon, the storm now close enough that the air carried the metal smell of rain. Daniel held the barn door and looked back at the northeast field one more time before following the others inside. Rathburn Holloway came back to the farm the following morning with a lawyer. The lawyer's name was Corbin Nash, and he had the practiced bearing of someone who spent his professional life in conference rooms where the stakes were high and the language was always careful. He wore a dark suit inappropriate for April mud in Kingfisher County and carried a leather portfolio that he set on the kitchen table as though the table were already his. He introduced himself with the kind of measured cordiality that means the next thing out of his mouth will not be cordial. Western Continental Energy Partners, Nash explained, had conducted geological surveys of the region over the previous several years as part of standard formation mapping. Those surveys had identified a potentially productive Woodford Shale zone that extended across several property lines in the immediate area, including properties where Western Continental held existing development agreements. The company had invested significantly in infrastructure based on those surveys. Now it appeared that questions might arise regarding the precise extent of the subsurface formation relative to the Croft property boundary. He said none of this directly. He said it in the way skilled corporate lawyers speak about trespass and unauthorized extraction when they have not yet decided whether to settle or fight, with nouns that replaced actions and passive constructions that removed agents and a consistent register of hypothetical distance between the words and what the words described. Anna let him finish. Then she said, "You have been drilling laterally under my father's property for 11 years. Nash did not change his expression. Our counsel's position is that the formation mapping was conducted in good faith and that the lateral extent of the productive zone was not fully established at the time of the initial permits. The surveys attached to your well permits show the lateral extent with considerable precision. We requested those surveys from the OCC Public Records Office 2 days ago. They show that Western Continental was aware the lateral sections would cross the Croft property line before any of the 4 wells was drilled." A short silence. Holloway looked at Nash. Nash said, "My client would like to resolve this matter in a way that is beneficial to all parties. Your client has extracted approximately $180 million in natural gas from under a property to which it holds no mineral rights, without the knowledge or consent of the mineral rights owner, over 11 years. Anna kept her voice even and her posture relaxed, the particular calm of someone who knows the strength of their position and is not interested in displaying emotion about it. That is the starting number. Trespass damages, interest, and punitive exposure are additional. Holloway's practiced friendliness was gone. What replaced it was the expression of a man who had expected a different kind of conversation and was recalibrating in real time. "Miss Croft, your father is a farmer who is significantly behind on his mortgage. We came here today. My father owns mineral rights that your company has been exploiting without authorization for 11 years. My father also recently discovered a legal matter of an entirely different nature that will require his full attention and the attention of multiple legal firms in the coming months." She looked at Nash directly. "This is not a conversation we are going to have at a kitchen table. Any communications from Western Continental should go to our attorneys of record, which I will have established within the week." Corbin Nash closed his portfolio and stood. Holloway stood. "This is not the outcome we were hoping for," Nash said. "I know," Anna said. After they left, Marcus came in from the dining room where he had been sitting out of sight, but within earshot. He looked at Anna with the expression of someone who has just watched a good piece of work being executed and is registering his approval without theatrics. Daniel was at the kitchen window, watching the silver sedan back out of the driveway. His farm, his failing farm, for months behind on a note that Holloway's company had apparently been counting on to make him reachable and manageable. He tried to find anger in that and found something flatter instead, not indifference, but a settled understanding of what had been intended and what had failed. They had come to buy his desperation at the price of his debt. That was the calculation. It had not worked out. What happens now, he said. Now we have multiple fronts, Marcus said. The restitution claims require the claims conference and the WGRO as co-claimants. Legally, this will move through German courts and U.S. federal jurisdiction simultaneously, which is slow, but the eventual settlement value is not in question. The mineral rights matter is cleaner and faster. Oklahoma trespass law is well established, and the OCC records make Western Continental's knowledge of the lateral extent essentially impossible to deny. He paused. You need a good property and energy attorney in Tulsa, and you need a restitution attorney with international experience. Those can be different people. I know someone for the energy side, Anna said. She works in commercial litigation and has done trespass recovery cases. I trust her work and I trust her judgment about what is worth fighting and what should be settled. And I know the right person for the restitution side. She is based in Washington, D.C., and has managed 3 of the largest post-war asset recovery settlements in the last 15 years. Her firm works on contingency for clients without resources to fund litigation up front. Marcus looked at Daniel. You will not need to pay anything out of pocket. The value of the claims covers the cost many times over. The Altman business documentation, Daniel said. The furniture company. Does that change the number you gave me this morning? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Potentially significantly. Business restitution claims of that era, with documentation this clear, including both the original seizure records and the company's subsequent operating history, are among the most valuable in this area of law. The Altman's case alone might represent 1/3 of the total restitution figure. He looked at Daniel steadily. None of that money comes to you. I want to be very clear about that. The restitution proceeds go to the surviving families. What comes to you is the mineral rights recovery. Those are separate matters legally and financially. Daniel nodded. He had not asked about the restitution money in those terms and did not intend to. What Walter had put in the ground was not his to take any more than it had been Walter's to keep. The mineral rights were different. The mineral rights were something Western Continental had been taking from him for 11 years without his knowledge, and recovering those was a different kind of justice from a different kind of wrong. 2 separate wrongs, he said, that ended up pointing at the same field. Marcus considered this. Your grandfather chose this particular field for the chamber because it was the highest ground on the northeast acreage. Best drainage, as you said. He was thinking about preservation. He was not thinking about the Woodford Shale Formation 7,000 feet below it. A brief pause. Sometimes the right decision is right for more than one reason without the person making it knowing why. Daniel sat down at the kitchen table. The bank letters were still there, pushed to the side when the table had been needed for the documents, and the laptop and the coffee cups of people who had been working here for 2 days. He picked the top one up and looked at it. Citizens Bank of Enid. Foreclosure proceedings in the second paragraph. For months in arrears. He put it face down. Anna made the call to Hannah Stern that evening at 7 o'clock. She asked Marcus to leave the kitchen. She asked Daniel to leave as well. And he did, going out to the porch where the April night had cooled quickly after the storm, and sitting in the older of the 2 chairs while Marcus stood at the porch rail looking out at the field and neither of them speaking. Through the kitchen window, they could see Anna at the table, the notebook open in front of her, her posture attentive and still. She sat at the table with Walter's notebook open to the final pages, and she dialed the number the WGRO had provided. The phone rang 4 times. A woman's voice answered. Careful, steady, with the particular quality of someone who has learned over a long life to answer unfamiliar calls with measured attention rather than open expectation. Anna introduced herself. She explained who her father was and where the farm was located. She explained, carefully and in sequence, what Daniel had found when he plowed the northeast field, the dog tags, the notebook, the chamber, the documentation. She named the crates and their contents. She said the name Altman. She said Schwabisch Hall. The silence on the other end of the line was the kind that happens when a person receives information they have been told for their entire life did not exist and is finding the floor again. My grandmother's family, Hannah said. Yes. Their assets were listed in the register. Their photographs were in the folder. A letter from your grandmother to my great-grandfather is in the trunk he left. She wrote to him in 1952 and again in 1953. She knew someone had tried. Hannah Stern was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice had changed, still steady, but different, thinner, as if she were speaking from somewhere farther away. She told me, when I was small. She told me a soldier had written to her from America. She said he seemed genuine, but that he never came. She said sometimes people mean to do the right thing and cannot find their way to it. Anna said nothing, letting the silence hold what it needed to hold. Are the photographs there? Hannah said. My grandmother's family. Is there a family photograph in the folder? There is. Parents and 4 children. One of them is a little girl in a white dress. Hannah made a sound that was not quite a word. A small involuntary sound, the kind that happens when something hits a place you did not know was open. The girl in the white dress was my grandmother, she said. Miriam Altman. She was 7 years old in that photograph. Her mother dressed her in that dress for the photograph specifically because her father was a furniture manufacturer and they had clients coming that afternoon and her mother wanted her to look. She stopped. She started again. My grandmother kept a copy of that photograph until she died. She said it was the last good day she remembered clearly. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside on the porch, Daniel watched Anna through the window and could not hear the words but could see something in the way she held her pen above the notebook without writing. I would like to come, Hannah Stern said. If that is acceptable, I would like to come and see the place. We hoped you would, Anna said. Come whenever you are ready. Daniel learned about the phone call in pieces as Anna came out to the porch and relayed it section by section, her voice careful and controlled in the way it was when she had been moved by something and was deciding how much of that to show. He listened to all of it without speaking. Marcus stood at the porch rail during this, looking at the cleared sky, giving Daniel the space a man needs when receiving news that is going to take time to finish landing. When she finished, the 3 of them stood on the porch in the silence that follows significant information. After a time, Daniel said, She said my grandfather seemed genuine. He was, Marcus said. But he did not go to Chicago. He could not find his way to it. That is different from not being genuine. Marcus turned from the porch rail. The people who cannot find their way to the thing they mean to do carry it. Your grandfather carried it for 15 years after Miriam Altman told him not to be another one who tried and could not. He carried it until he was dying, and then he put it in the ground for whoever came next. Daniel was quiet for a moment. And whoever came next was me. Because the banknote finally got large enough. You opened the gate, Marcus said. The reason you opened it is between you and the gate. He went to bed shortly after that. Anna stayed at the kitchen table with her laptop, working through the framework of what needed to be filed and in what order, building the structure of a legal case that would move through multiple jurisdictions and take years to resolve, but whose foundations needed to be in place before Western Continental finished designing its counterargument. She had spoken to the Washington attorney already, a brief call to set an appointment for the following morning. She had spoken to the Tulsa commercial litigator as well. The mineral rights case and the restitution case would proceed in parallel, and the 2 bodies of work would never formally intersect, but they were parts of the same discovery, the same Oklahoma field, the same dead man's instructions. She had left her job in Tulsa on hold for 3 days now and had not yet decided whether she was going back. Cal had called twice. She had not answered. She sat in the kitchen that had been her father's kitchen her entire childhood and was also her great-grandfather's kitchen and filled a legal pad with notes in her clean paralegal's handwriting, the coffee going cold beside her, the lamp making a warm circle on the table while the rest of the farmhouse was dark and quiet. Daniel could not sleep for a long time. He lay in the same bedroom where he had grown up, the same ceiling overhead that he had looked at as a boy when he could not sleep before the first day of school or the last day before harvest, and he thought about things in no particular order. The bank letters on the kitchen table, the dog tags on the chain, Raymond Heffler teaching high school mathematics in Milwaukee, and then dying in a car accident at some age too young, with the ledgers from a German mine in a filing cabinet in his garage. His wife finding the folders, setting them with the rest of Raymond's belongings, closing the cabinet door. He thought about the 5 men standing in front of the mine entrance in the April light of 1945, young and tired, and the word brothers on the back of the photograph. What that word meant after 3 years of war in a foreign country, surrounded by people who wanted to kill them, and people who had been killed, and people who were dying in the specific way that history was killing people in Germany in 1945. What it meant to stand in a salt mine in a German hillside looking at crates of stolen property and photographs of murdered families, and make a collective decision that the institution you were part of could not be trusted to do what was right. They were not wrong about that. The institutions had not done what was right. 63 years later, in a farmhouse in Oklahoma, the documentation that 5 young men had pulled out of a mine and carried home and stored and tried to use was the primary evidence in a case that the institutions might finally complete, with enough legal pressure and enough time. He thought about Walter in this room, in this same dark, in whatever year it had been when the cancer made sleep impossible and there was nothing left to do but lie in the dark and add up what remained unfinished. I could not do this. Walter had not said he did nothing. He had not said he did not try. He had said he could not do this, which was a specific and honest accounting of a specific and honest failure. The distinction was the whole of it. A man who does nothing does not build a sealed chamber under his property and fill it with evidence and write 37 careful pages explaining what the evidence means. A man who does nothing does not scratch words into a brass tag with a sharp blade before sealing it into the ground. They are not forgotten. Walter had written it for whoever came next. He already knew the names. He could not forget them. He wrote it for the stranger who would someday need to know that the things buried here were not merely buried things, but obligations, carried things, things that had been waiting with intention and not simply left behind. Daniel got up before 4 o'clock, which was when he always got up, and he dressed in his work clothes and went downstairs and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with Anna's laptop closed beside him and Walter's notebook open. He read the last page again. Tell them someone tried. Tell them they were not forgotten. He closed the notebook carefully and put it back in the zippered bag with the photograph and the tags. He carried the bag to the attic and put it in the trunk where it had been since 1963, beside the Purple Heart and the discharge papers and the 3 letters on JDC letterhead that told Walter no, not this way. We cannot help you find them this way. He left the trunk open. Then he went out to do the morning feeding, because the farm needed that the same as it had needed it every morning for 31 years, and the cattle did not know or care what was buried in the northeast field, or what it had been worth, or who was coming from Chicago to stand on the ground above it. Some things required attending regardless of what else was happening. Carl had known that, and Walter had known it, and Daniel had learned it early and never forgotten it. The morning was cold and clear, the storm completely gone. The sky overhead as clean as it ever got in April. He carried water to the stock tanks and counted the cattle in the south section and checked the fence along the creek where the bank sometimes gave way after rain. Ordinary work. The work his father had done and his grandfather had done on this ground, with different equipment and the same fundamental purpose. The same chores in the same order, changed only by the machines and the prices and the weather, which changed every year, and by the weight a man carried when he came out to do them, which changed only when something large enough to change it arrived. He stood at the fence along the creek and looked north toward the northeast 40 in the early light. The field sat quiet, the boards invisible from this distance, the ground surface showing only the new turning of his first partial plow pass from a week ago and the undisturbed pasture grass beyond it. He thought about finishing the pass, not to plant, since there was not enough of the season left for a winter wheat crop and the market was not promising anyway, but because a field that had been opened deserved to be opened properly, because leaving half a job undone was its own kind of statement, and the Northeast 40 had been a half-done thing for 63 years. He could finish the plow pass once the legal filings were in order and the gold had been moved to a secure location and the families had been formally notified and everything that needed to be set in motion had been set in motion. The field would be there. It had been there before any of this, and it would be there after, and the soil survey from 3 winters back said it was the best ground on the property. He would finish the plowing when this was settled. When the legal filings were in order and the gold had been properly cataloged and the families had been reached and the mineral rights case was filed and the bank had received its call. Then he would go back out to the field that Walter had forbidden and that circumstances had finally opened, and he would run the John Deere through it properly, from fence line to fence line, turning the good dark soil that had been resting under pasture grass since 1948. He would plant it. What grew in it would be his. Hannah Stern was going to call back in the morning with a travel date. The Washington attorney was going to hear from Anna at 9 o'clock. Citizens Bank of Enid was going to receive a call from Anna's Tulsa contact at some point in the next week, a call that would change the nature of the conversation between the bank and the Croft farm in a way the bank's form letters had not anticipated. All of that was coming. But right now, in the early light on the fence line by the creek, none of it had happened yet. It was just the farm and the morning and the northeast field, and whatever Walter had put in the ground in 1948 was still exactly where he had left it, waiting the way it had waited for 63 years with the patience of things that cannot move themselves and must trust that someone will eventually come. Someone had come. He turned away from the field and walked back toward the barn, where Marcus's pickup was parked and the kitchen light was on, and Anna was already at the table working, the coffee made, the day's first task already underway. He pulled the barn door open and went inside, and the ordinary work of the morning continued, unchanged in its requirements, unchanged in its rhythms, the same as it had always been. Hannah Stern arrived on a Tuesday in May, 3 weeks after Anna's call, driving a rental car from Will Rogers Airport in Oklahoma City that she navigated the 60 miles to Kingfisher County with a printed map because she did not trust the phone's GPS, which was a habit that Anna, watching her pull into the driveway from the porch, recognized as belonging to a person who had learned that technology was useful but not reliable in the same way that a piece of paper you could fold was reliable. She was 78 years old and small-framed, with silver hair cut close and the kind of posture that comes not from ease but from deliberate maintenance of a body that has required attention across a long life. She wore practical traveling clothes, dark slacks, and a gray jacket, and she carried a single small bag. She stood beside the rental car and looked at the farmhouse and the fields around it with an expression that Daniel could not read from the porch. Not quite recognition, not quite shock. The expression of someone confronting a place that has existed in her mind as an abstraction and is finding the abstraction replaced by something specific and physical and real. He walked down the porch steps and across the gravel to meet her. They shook hands, which was slightly formal and also exactly right for two people who did not yet know each other, but were connected by something that had preceded them both by 6 decades. "It looks like a farm," she said. "It is a farm." She looked at the northeast field across the fence line. "That's it." "Yes." She stood looking at it for a moment. The field with its half-plowed first pass from a month ago, and its pasture grass, and its unremarkable surface that had no visible reason to have brought a retired schoolteacher from Chicago to a wheat farm in central Oklahoma. "My grandmother's things have been in that field since 1948, she said. "A little longer than that. Your grandfather's family had their things before 1948. The mine was in 1945. She nodded slowly. 73 years. She said it the way people say a number when they are checking whether it still sounds as large as it should. It did. "I want to see the notebook first, if that's acceptable, before the field." He took her inside. Anna made coffee and set the zippered bag on the kitchen table, and then, reading the room correctly, went out to the porch. Marcus had driven back to Oklahoma City 2 days earlier, leaving detailed written instructions for the legal process and a direct phone number for calls any time of day. The farmhouse was quiet. Daniel unzipped the bag and set the notebook, the photograph, and the 2 dog tags on the table in front of Hannah. She looked at them without touching anything for a moment. Then she picked up the photograph first, the 6 men in front of the mine entrance, the word brothers on the back. "He was young," she said. 23 when this was taken. She set the photograph down and picked up the notebook. She opened it to the first page and read the opening in silence. Her face was very still. She read without rushing, turning the pages carefully, reading the whole of it. When she finished, she set it down and sat with her hands flat on the table. "He organized the folders with ours on top," she said. "Marcus told you that on the phone." "I know. I wanted to hear it again from you. There is a difference between knowing something and hearing it said out loud by the person who opened the field." She set the notebook down. "You must have known, when you found the dog tags and read the message, that something significant was there. But you did not know what. You came back with your daughter, and you opened the ground anyway." She looked at him. That took a kind of faith, not in any particular outcome, but in the idea that what was there deserved to be found. Daniel thought about it honestly. It took desperation more than faith. "The banknote was the reason I plowed the field. Finding the tags was the reason I didn't stop. Those are not as different as they sound, Hannah said. She looked at Daniel across the table. He tried the hardest with us. With my grandmother. He had the letters. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. My grandmother kept a box of documents from before the war. What she had been able to carry or recover over the years. There was a carbon copy of a letter in the box, dated the summer of 1952. She had written it, but kept the copy. It was addressed to a Mr. Croft in Kingfisher County, Oklahoma, and it said she did not know whether to trust him, but that she was willing to try. Hannah looked down at the notebook. She showed it to me when I was 12 years old. She said, "Someone is trying to give back what was taken from us." She said, "I do not know if he will succeed, but at least he is trying. I want you to know that such people exist." Daniel said nothing. Hannah reached forward and picked up the second dog tag, the one with the message on the back. She tilted it toward the window light, the same way Daniel had tilted it in the field a month ago, and she read the scratched letters. "They are not forgotten." She set it back on the table. She pressed one hand flat over it for a moment, not holding it, just covering it. "He said it in the right tense," she said. "Not they were not forgotten. They are not forgotten. Present tense." She lifted her hand. He intended it to still be true when someone read it. They went out to the field after lunch. Anna came this time, walking a few steps behind them, giving them the space but present. The May sun was warm and the wind had come up from the south, the kind of wind that in Oklahoma signaled summer arriving ahead of schedule. Hannah walked to the spot where the boards were and stood above it. She did not say anything for a long time. The field around them was quiet, the pasture grass moving in the wind, a hawk working the air above the fence line to the south. "It's strange," she said finally, "standing above something that has been here longer than I have." She looked at the boards, at the stones along the edges where Daniel had placed them. "Can we open it?" The gold has already been transferred to the Claims Conference secure facility in Washington. Marcus arranged that 2 weeks ago. But the documentation is still here, the photographs and the ledgers. And the fifth crate. "What is in the fifth crate?" He told her. She stood very still while he described each item. The menorah, the Torah scroll case, the candlesticks, the child's cup with the engraved name. "The cup," she said. "The name engraved on it. We had it translated. The name is Miriam." She looked at the boards for a long time. "My grandmother's name," she said. It was not a question. "Yes." She crouched down and put both hands flat on the boards, the way you put your hands on something to establish that it is real. Then she stood back up and looked at the field around her, at the sky above it, at the fence line and the creek visible in the distance, and the farmhouse beyond. "He hid the most personal things at the back," she said. "The gold at the front, the documents behind that, and the family objects at the very back where no one would reach them unless they went all the way in." She looked at Daniel. He put the most important things in the safest place. Daniel had thought the same thing when Marcus had pointed it out, but he had not been able to say it as clearly as Hannah just had. "Your grandfather plowed this field to save the farm," Hannah said. "That's what you told Anna." "Yes. My grandmother said something once, when I was older and asking about the war years and how she had survived. She said the people who survived were often not the strongest or the bravest. They were the ones who needed to survive for a reason that was larger than themselves. She needed to survive because she was the only one left who remembered her family. Someone needed to remember them." Hannah looked down at the boards again. "Your grandfather needed to plow this field because the farm was going to be taken from him if he did not. And in plowing it, he found what was here. And what was here had been put here because a dying man needed someone to find it." She paused. "My grandmother would have called this God's work. I am not sure what I call it, but it is not an accident." Daniel thought about the morning he had opened the gate into the Northeast 40. The specific mathematics of desperation that had finally overridden 31 years of honoring a dead man's instruction. The banknote. The frozen line of credit. $1,847 in checking. "What made you plow it after all this time?" Hannah asked. "You said the instruction was there since 1948. What made this particular spring different?" He told her the truth, all of it. The bank letters. The 4 months in arrears. The feeling of running out of road. She listened without the expression of someone waiting for a more dignified answer. "Necessity is not a lesser reason," she said. "My grandmother did not survive the war because she was particularly courageous. She survived because she had no other option, and when you have no other option you discover what you are capable of. You plowed this field because you had no other option. And in doing so, you did what your grandfather could not. She looked at the field one more time. I want to take the cup home with me, she said, when it is legally possible. And the candlesticks. Not for a museum. For my dining room table. Because that is where they were meant to be. They stood there in the warm May wind for a while longer, neither of them speaking, the field doing what fields do, which is to exist quietly and wait for the next thing to be asked of them. The legal cases moved on separate tracks and at different speeds, which was exactly what Marcus had told Daniel to expect. Caroline Torres, the Tulsa attorney Anna had brought in for the mineral rights case, filed the formal complaint against Western Continental Energy Partners within 10 days of the first conversation. The filing was precise and comprehensive. 11 years of unauthorized lateral drilling under the Croft mineral rights, supported by OCC production records, the geological survey exhibits from the well permits, and a financial damages calculation prepared by a petroleum engineering firm that Torres had used on 2 previous trespass cases. The filing also included, as a supporting exhibit, documentation of Western Continental's repeated attempts to acquire the Croft property before the lawsuit was filed, which established a pattern of conduct that suggested the company understood its legal exposure and had been actively working to resolve it through purchase rather than remediation. Torres was 51 years old and had spent a third of her professional life on energy trespass cases in Oklahoma, which was a state where such cases were neither rare nor unusual, but where the financial stakes varied enormously depending on the formation depth, the production history, and the quality of the documentation establishing mineral rights ownership. The Croft case had all 3 working in the plaintiff's favor. Woodford Shale at depth, 11 years of production records fully documented in the public OCC database, and a deed from 1948 with mineral rights language so explicit that it had apparently been noticed and noted in Western Continental's own geological survey before the first well was drilled. Corbin Nash filed Western Continental's response 3 weeks later, asserting good faith reliance on formation mapping data and arguing that the lateral extent of the productive zone had not been definitively established at the time of drilling. The response was competent and predictable, and Torres had anticipated every argument in it. The discovery phase was brief, because most of the relevant documents were already in the public record through the OCC's database and the well permit files. Torres deposed Rathburn Holloway for 4 hours in early July. Daniel had not been in the room, but Anna had, and she described it to him afterward. Holloway was precise and controlled for the first 2 hours, and then Torres produced the internal geological survey that Western Continental had commissioned in 2012, a full year before the first well permit was filed. The survey showed the Woodford Formation extending under the Croft Northeast 40 with a notation in the margin, mineral rights status, unverified/unencumbered. Holloway had looked at that document for approximately 15 seconds and then asked for a break. He had known. The margin notation proved that someone in Western Continental's planning process had flagged the Croft mineral rights as unencumbered before the first drill bit went in the ground. The company had known it was drilling under land it had no rights to. The good faith argument, never very strong, collapsed entirely. Western Continental offered a settlement in August. The initial figure was $40 million. Torres sent back a single-page response that outlined the company's punitive exposure under Oklahoma's trespass statutes and their estimated jury award range given the duration of the unauthorized extraction, the documented prior knowledge, and the company's subsequent pattern of attempting to intimidate the mineral rights holder into a quiet sale. The counterfigure was $120 million. They settled in October at $87 million, net of attorney's fees and costs. Torres called Daniel on a Thursday afternoon in the 3rd week of October and told him, and he sat down at the kitchen table where the bank letters had been piled since April and looked at the wall for a while. The bank note was paid the following Monday morning, all of it, principal and outstanding interest and fees, in a single wire transfer. The loan officer who processed it asked if the Croft farm was the one connected to the mineral rights case he had been reading about in the paper. Daniel said it was. The loan officer said congratulations and seemed to mean it. Daniel thanked him and left the bank and sat in his truck in the parking lot for a few minutes, in the specific silence of a thing that has been pressing on you for a long time finally not pressing. The restitution proceedings were longer and more complex, as Marcus had warned, because they moved through multiple legal systems simultaneously and required coordination between the claims conference, the World Jewish Restitution Organization, the German Federal Ministry of Finance, and American federal courts, each of which had its own procedural timelines and requirements. The Altman case was filed first because the documentation was most complete and because Hannah Stern's status as the verified sole heir to Miriam Altman's claims was straightforward to establish. The Altman mobile work business claim, the one Marcus had identified as potentially the largest single component, required a separate valuation by a team of German economic historians who spent 3 months examining the company's operating history from 1938 through its final sale in 1971. Their report ran to 400 pages and established a base value for the seized business assets of approximately 61 million euros before interest calculations. A German federal court accepted jurisdiction of the full Altman claim in November. The settlement was reached 14 months after Daniel had plowed the northeast field, following a negotiation that involved attorneys in 2 countries and a formal session before a German administrative tribunal in Stuttgart. The total Altman settlement was 78 million euros, paid through the Federal Republic of Germany's post-war restitution program. Hannah Stern, as the sole verified heir of Miriam Altman, received the principal portion of that amount. She called Daniel the day the settlement was confirmed. It was an early December morning, and he was doing the feeding when Anna appeared at the barn door and said Hannah was on the phone. He took the call standing in the barn with the smell of hay and diesel around him. "I don't know what to say to you," Hannah said. "There are not words that do this properly. You don't need to find them. My grandmother waited her whole life for this. She did not see it." A pause. "But she knew someone was trying. She knew it from the letter, and she told me, and I will tell my children. There is a continuity in that." "There is," Daniel said. The settlement for the remaining 22 families was ongoing, moving through the claims conference's standard processing at the pace that bureaucratic thoroughness required. 8 families were reached within the first year, their claims filed, and their cases entered into the German restitution system. The remaining 14 were in various stages of heir tracing, the detective work of finding living descendants of families who had been scattered across decades of displacement and immigration. Marcus estimated the full process would take 4 to 6 years. He had been brought on formally as the historical consultant to the claims conference on the Croft collection, which was what the documentation had come to be called in the legal filings. The ceremonial items from the 5th crate were returned to their identified families as each claim was resolved. The menorah, the Torah scroll case, the candlesticks, and the child's silver cup with Miriam's name on it went to Hannah when the Altman settlement was finalized. She drove out to the farm to collect them, making the trip from Chicago in a rented car with a padded carrying case she had brought specifically for this purpose. She and Daniel carried the items from the chamber together, Marcus having photographed and documented each one for the historical archive before the formal transfer. They wrapped them carefully in the padded case. Hannah zipped it closed and sat with it on her lap in the kitchen for a while before carrying it to the car. "Not a museum," she said, when Daniel walked her out. "You said that in May. I want to make sure you understand. These things were taken from my grandmother's family because someone decided that objects were more important than people. I am not going to put them back behind glass where they are objects again." She put the carrying case in the back seat. "They go on my table. They go in my home. They get used." Daniel nodded. "That is what they were for," he said. She looked at him over the roof of the rental car. "Your grandfather understood that. He kept them in a box in a field, which is not ideal, but he understood that they were family things and not collection pieces. He kept them separate from the gold. He kept them last." She put her hand on the roof of the car. He knew what he had. She drove away, and Daniel stood in the driveway until the car reached the county road and turned east toward the highway. Anna had stayed. She had gone back to Tulsa once, in June, to retrieve her belongings from the apartment she had been sharing with Kyle and to have the conversation she had known for some time was coming. Kyle had been pragmatic about it, which was in some ways harder than if he had not been. He said he understood that what had happened at the farm had changed things for her, and he supposed he respected that. She said it was not only what had happened at the farm. He looked at her for a moment and said he supposed that was true too. They said the kind of careful things that people say when a relationship is ending without bitterness, when the ending is not about failure, but about two people whose directions had diverged at a point neither had seen coming. She had called Daniel from the parking lot of the apartment building after loading her car. He picked up on the second ring. She said, "I'm staying in Oklahoma." He said, "I know." She said, "I'm going to work for Marchetti's firm remotely. I'll need the spare bedroom as an office." He said, "It's already set up." She had not known that. She sat in the parking lot for a while after they hung up, in the full weight of a decision that had already been made before she consciously made it. She had resigned from Donovan and Marsh by letter, which her supervising partner accepted with professional grace, and a note that said her work had been excellent and that the firm's door remained open. She submitted an application to Elena Marchetti's firm in Washington, whose restitution practice had become the most active in the country following the Croft filing and the visibility the case had generated. Marchetti had offered her a position in October. She would work remotely from Oklahoma, handling the ongoing documentation requests from the Claims Conference, the WJRO, and the 22 remaining families whose claims were in progress. On the weekends, Anna was at the kitchen table with her laptop and the legal pad and the coffee she made too strong, working through the correspondence that kept arriving from the family's attorneys and occasionally from journalists who had followed the story and wanted to understand it more clearly. She had developed a form response for the journalists that was polite and uninformative. What the journalists wanted was the discovery narrative and the dollar figures, and those were real, but Anna had spent enough months inside the actual story to understand that what it was really about could not be communicated in any format designed to be consumed quickly. He planted the Northeast 40 with winter wheat in late September, after the settlement with Western Continental was finalized and the board removal and documentation work by the University of Oklahoma's Agricultural History program was complete. The university team had spent 2 full days at the site, photographing the chamber's construction details and taking samples of the pine timber and the tar seal for their materials dating study. Their report confirmed 1948 as the construction date and described the chamber as an example of what they called vernacular preservation engineering, a phrase that meant Walter had built it well using only his understanding of the materials and the problem, without any formal training in either. He ran the John Deere through the field from fence line to fence line, the 6-bottom plow turning the soil that had been under pasture grass since before he was born. The field turned dark, and even under the plow, the clay loam exactly what the county soil survey had said it was 40 years ago when Daniel had first read it, rich and well-drained and ready. The smell of the open ground was specific to this field in a way that was hard to account for agronomically. He noticed it and did not say anything about it to anyone. He worked the field for 2 days. He did not rush it. He planted at the right depth and the right rate. He waited. The wheat came up in October, green lines across the dark field that by November were thick enough to give the Northeast 40 a color it had never had in Daniel's lifetime. He walked the field on a Sunday in late November and found it better than he had hoped. The stand was even and dense, the root development strong, where the undisturbed soil structure held moisture through the root zone in a way that the rest of his cultivated ground did not quite match. Longfellow built the kind of tilth that decades of farming depleted. Walter had kept this field out of production for the 15 years he farmed it, and then the obligation had kept it out for 60 more. That had been its own kind of management, unintentional but effective. The harvest the following July was 68 bushels per acre, the highest yield on the property by a significant margin, in a year when most Kingfisher County farms were reporting 45 to 50 bushels on ground worked every season for decades. The Northeast 40 held its moisture better than the surrounding ground, and the yield reflected it. Daniel's elevator operator, Roy Stuckey, who had been weighing Daniel's grain for 20 years, looked at the ticket and then looked at Daniel. "That's real good for a dry year," Roy said. "Good ground," Daniel said. "You plant that new?" "First time." Roy looked at the ticket again. "First time planted in how long?" "Never. My grandfather bought the property in 1948, and it never went under plow until last fall." Roy was quiet for a moment. "That explains the yield. You should have done it years ago." "I know," Daniel said. He did not explain why he had not. Marcus came back to the farm in the fall, officially in his capacity as historical consultant, but also because the project had acquired the quality that significant work sometimes acquires, which is that the people involved in it find reasons to return even when the immediate professional necessity has passed. He and Daniel spent an afternoon sealing the chamber with the new boards and fitting the bronze marker at the fence line. The marker was small and plain, cast at a foundry in Enid, set in a concrete base. It read, Walter James Croft built this structure in 1948. He preserved what he could not yet deliver. It was delivered. Daniel had written the text, and Marcus had looked at it for a while, and then said he would not change a word. They set the marker in late October, a clear afternoon with the light going flat and gold across the field, the new wheat stubble from the first harvest visible behind them. Marcus took a photograph of the marker. Daniel stood beside it and looked at the field. He would not have expected the oil company, Daniel said. Marcus looked up from the camera. No, he was thinking about the families. The gold, the documents. That was the obligation. The oil company is something entirely separate. The oil company is what let you keep the farm, Marcus said, which is what let you have the time and the resources to handle the obligation properly. The two things are connected, even if he could not have known they would be. Daniel considered this. He had thought about it in different ways across the months since April, turning it over the way you turn over a piece of work that is finished but that you are still trying to understand. His grandfather had chosen this field for the chamber because of the drainage, because of the elevation, because it was the best positioned acreage on the property. He had protected it with an instruction in the deed and forbidden anyone to touch it. And in protecting it, he had also, without knowing it, protected the Woodford Shale Formation below it from being leased away to some energy company in an era when everyone around him was leasing their mineral rights for whatever they could get. The obligation and the fortune had been in the same field because Walter had made the same decision for the same reason. He had chosen the best ground. Hannah came back in August, between the wheat harvest and the fall planting, staying for 3 days. She walked the Northeast 40 twice a day, morning and evening, the way someone walks a place they are still learning to understand. Each time she went out, she came back without having said much about what she had been thinking, and Daniel did not ask, because some understandings need to be arrived at in private before they can be shared. On the second day, she walked with him while he checked the fence along the creek, which needed attention every few weeks in summer after the cattle worked the bank down. They moved along the fence line in the late afternoon, Daniel testing the wire at the staples and Hannah walking beside him. And she talked about her grandmother in a way that she had not talked before, with more specific detail and less careful selection, the way people talk when they have decided they can trust the person they are talking to. Miriam Altman had arrived in Chicago in 1948 with her mother, who died the following year. She had arrived speaking almost no English and knowing almost no one, and had spent the first years rebuilding herself from the ground up with the methodical patience of someone who understood that there was no shortcut through the required work. She had learned English in night classes while working in a textile factory during the day. She had married in 1953 a man named David Bergman, who had also come from Germany and who had also lost most of his family, which gave them a specific kind of understanding between them that did not require explanation. She had not been demonstrative about what she had lost or what she had survived. She had told her children the factual outline and no more. She had shown Hannah the box of documents when Hannah was 12, including the carbon copy of the letter, and had said what she said about someone trying. She had not been bitter, as far as Hannah could tell, though Hannah acknowledged she might have been in ways she chose not to show. She had been practical. She had built what she could build with what she had. She had died at 69 of a heart condition in 1987, in the same city she had arrived at with nothing, having made it into a place she belonged. She never stopped believing the letter would be answered, Hannah said. Not specifically, not with an expectation that the farmer in Oklahoma would show up at her door. But she believed that what had been taken would eventually be returned, because she believed that the accounting for things eventually came due. She looked at the creek. She was right. It took 34 years after her death, but the accounting came. Miriam Altman had arrived in Chicago in 1948 with her mother, who died the following year. She had arrived speaking almost no English and knowing almost no one, and had spent the first years rebuilding herself from the ground up with the methodical patience of someone who understood that there was no shortcut through the required work. She had learned English in night classes while working in a textile factory during the day. She had married in 1953 a man named David Bergman, who had also come from Germany and who had also lost most of his family, which gave them a specific kind of understanding between them that did not require explanation. She had not been demonstrative about what she had lost or what she had survived. She had told her children the factual outline and no more. She had shown Hannah the box of documents when Hannah was 12, including the carbon copy of the letter, and had said what she said about someone trying. She had not been bitter, as far as Hannah could tell, though Hannah acknowledged she might have been in ways she chose not to show. She had been practical. She had built what she could build with what she had. She had died at 69 of a heart condition in 1987, in the same city she had arrived at with nothing, having made it into a place she belonged. She kept the photograph, Hannah said. The one Anna described to me on the phone. The family photograph from before the war. She had a copy of it. I don't know how she obtained it. Possibly from a relative who had left Germany earlier. It sat on her mantle her whole life in Chicago. She looked at it every day. Daniel thought about the photograph in the chamber. The parents and 4 children and the little girl in the white dress. The same image Miriam had looked at every day for 39 years in an apartment in Chicago. The photograph in the chamber is the original, he said. I know. Hannah looked at the creek. When Anna described it to me, she said there was a little girl in a white dress. And I knew immediately which photograph she meant. I have seen it every day since my grandmother died. I keep it on my own mantle now. She paused. Miriam carried a copy for 39 years. The original was in a field in Oklahoma, being kept by someone who tried to deliver it to her. She never knew. He did not say anything. There was nothing useful to add. She would have liked knowing, Hannah said. Not the result. The result she would have accepted as right and proper. But she would have liked knowing that someone had held the original photograph carefully for all those years. That it had been preserved. She was precise about preservation. They stood at the fence for a while, the creek running low in the August heat, the cottonwood trees along the bank making their particular dry sound in the afternoon wind. Daniel thought about the 5 men standing in the mine entrance in April 1945, the photograph with brothers on the back. 23 years old, most of them. Farm boys and factory workers, and 1 high school math teacher, standing in a salt mine in Germany with rifles and muddy boots, making a collective decision about what should be done with something that had been taken from people who had been murdered, getting it mostly wrong in the execution, getting the intention right. Your grandfather was the only one who tried for as long as he did, Hannah said. The others, did any of them ever try to return anything? Marcus looked into it, Daniel said. 2 of the 5 men died in the 50s and 60s without any record of contacting the relief organizations. 1 man, a Walter Stein from Ohio, sent a donation to the Joint Distribution Committee in 1950 and then nothing more. Raymond Heffler tried to learn more German in the years before his accident. Your grandfather was the only one who kept at it for 18 years. Hannah was quiet for a moment. He was the one who built the chamber and kept the documentation. He was the one who had the letters from my grandmother. He was the most responsible, in both senses of the word, the most burdened and the most conscientious. Carl said he came back from the war carrying something he couldn't put down. He carried it correctly, Hannah said. He never dropped it. He put it somewhere safe when he could not carry it any further, and he left instructions. They finished checking the fence and walked back toward the farmhouse through the late afternoon heat. The northeast 40 was to their north, the stubble pale after the harvest, the marker at the fence line catching a glint of late sun. That evening they sat on the porch after dinner, all 3 of them, Daniel and Anna and Hannah, with the kind of comfortable quiet that develops between people who have been through something together and are on the other side of it. The insects were loud in the August dark, and the sky above the flat land was enormous in the way it only was in places where nothing interrupted it for miles. Hannah said, I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer it honestly. Daniel said he would. Do you regret not plowing that field sooner? 30 years you farmed around it. Your grandfather died in 1963. The obligation was in that field for 60 years before you found it. The families waited 60 years. Do you regret that you kept the instructions so long? He had thought about this in different ways across the previous months. He had thought about it at 4 in the morning and in the middle of the harvest, and when the bank settlement cleared, and when he walked the northeast 40 in the winter before the wheat came up. My grandfather left that instruction because he was the one who knew what was there and why it needed to be left alone, he said. He left it for my father, and my father left it for me. If I had plowed it before I was desperate enough, I might have found the chamber without the context. The notebook, the trunk, the letters. I might have found gold bars in the ground and done something different with them. Called the sheriff. Called a lawyer I didn't trust. Tried to sell them quietly without understanding what they were. He looked at the field in the dark. I found it when I was backed into a corner. And when you're backed into a corner, you think very carefully about your options. I had time to think because I was desperate, and I was desperate enough to understand that what I had found was larger than my desperation. He paused. I don't know if that's a better answer than I regret not doing it sooner. But it's the honest one. Hannah nodded. She accepted this without further comment, which was what she did when she had received an answer that was sufficient. They sat with the night sounds around them for a while. An owl somewhere along the creek. Cattle moving in the south section. The distant sound of a truck on the county road a half-mile away. My grandmother said something else, Hannah said, that I have been thinking about since Anna called me. She said, the people who have been through great suffering have a responsibility to the people who come after them, not to share the suffering, but to share the knowledge that it was survived, so that the ones who come after have evidence that survival is possible. She looked out at the field. Your grandfather put evidence in that field that something terrible had happened to real people and that someone had tried to answer it. That evidence survived. It was found. The people it was meant for received it. She let that sit in the air for a moment. My grandmother would have called that a complete story. She flew home the next morning, the small bag packed, the padded case with the family objects already shipped ahead. She shook hands with Daniel in the driveway as she had done in May, formal and correct, and then she put her hand on his arm briefly, which was a different gesture and a warmer one. You finished what he started, she said. He started to say something about the 22 remaining families, the claims still in process, the work still ongoing. You started finishing it, she said. That is enough for today. Marcus came back to the farm in the fall, officially in his capacity as historical consultant to the claims conference, but also because the project had acquired the quality that significant work sometimes acquires, which is that the people involved find reasons to return even after the immediate necessity is past. He and Daniel spent an afternoon sealing the chamber with the new boards and fitting the bronze marker at the fence line. The marker was small and plain, cast at a foundry in Enid, set in a concrete base. It read, Walter James Croft built this structure in 1948. He preserved what he could not yet deliver. It was delivered. Daniel had written the text, and Marcus had looked at it for a while and said he would not change a word. They set the marker in late October, a clear afternoon with the light going flat and gold across the field. Marcus took a photograph. Daniel stood beside it and looked at the field. He would not have expected the oil company, Daniel said. No, he was thinking about the families. The gold, the documents. That was the obligation. The oil company is something entirely separate. The oil company is what let you keep the farm, Marcus said. Which is what let you handle the obligation properly. The two things are connected, even if he could not have known they would be. Daniel considered this. He had thought about it in different ways across the months, turning it over the way you turn over a piece of work that is finished but that you are still trying to understand. His grandfather had chosen this field for the chamber because of the drainage and the elevation. He had protected it with an instruction in the deed because of the obligation. He had thereby protected the mineral rights in the Woodford Shale from being leased away in the decades when everyone around him was leasing. The obligation and the fortune were in the same field because Walter had made the same decision for the same reason. He had chosen the best ground. Everything else followed from that. After Marcus left, Daniel stood at the marker for a while in the late October cold. The harvest was in. The wheat ground was ready for its second planting. The Northeast 40 would go back into winter wheat in November, its second crop, building on the soil structure that the first harvest had established. In 3 or 4 years, with careful management, it would be producing consistently above the property's average. Walter had known that in 1948, he had chosen this ground to preserve because it was the best ground, and the best ground had waited 60 years in pasture grass for someone to ask something of it. There was a symmetry to that, or something close to symmetry. Walter had preserved the ground to protect the obligation, and the obligation had preserved the ground, and the ground had outlasted the obligation and was now free to be what it had always been. The best 40 acres on the property, ready for whatever was asked of it. Daniel looked at the marker one more time. He had written the text himself, and it said what he meant it to say. Not a monument, not a memorial in the grand sense. An acknowledgement that something had been here and had served its purpose, and that the purpose had been completed or was in the process of being completed, which was the more accurate thing to say. The 22 remaining families were still being reached. The claims conference was still working through the documentation. The process would run for years yet. A marker that said it was delivered was technically premature, but a marker that said it is being delivered was not the kind of sentence that belonged on a piece of bronze set in concrete. It was delivered was Walter's language. Present tense, as Hannah had said, intended to still be true when someone read it. He went back to the house. Anna was at the kitchen table with her laptop open and a call that had come in from the claims conference about one of the remaining 22 families, a case involving a family from Heilbronn whose air tracing had taken a new direction. She waved at him as he came in and continued the call, the efficient and careful language of someone doing work that mattered and knew it. The same language she had been learning across the months of this case, and that had replaced the commercial litigation vocabulary she had brought with her from Tulsa. He made coffee and sat down across the table from her and listened to her half of the conversation. He thought about Walter at this same table, writing letters in language he was still learning to the organizations whose job it was to locate the displaced and the surviving. The same flat light through the same kitchen windows. The same farmhouse that had been here since before both of them, holding whatever happened inside it with the patient durability of things built to last. The farmhouse had survived Walter and Carl and Daniel's 31 years of near failure and the months since the plow blade caught. It would survive whatever came next. The call ended. Anna looked up. She said there was a new development on the Heilbronn case. A researcher in Stuttgart had located a secondary branch of the family that had emigrated to Australia in 1946. She would need to work with Marcus's contacts at the WGRO to verify the documentation. She sounded the way she sounded now when she talked about the work, like someone who had found the thing she was supposed to be doing and was not planning to stop doing it. He said that sounded promising. She said she thought so too. Then she pulled up the relevant file and went back to work, and the kitchen had the particular quality it had most evenings now, the sound of a laptop and the smell of coffee and the specific kind of quiet that comes from two people working in the same room on things that matter, which was a kind of quiet Daniel had not known this farmhouse was capable of, and which he had not known he had been missing. Outside, the Northeast 40 was in stubble under the late October sky, the marker at its fence line small and plain and permanent against the paler ground. Below it, at 4 feet depth, Walter's chamber was sealed again with new boards, the 5th crate empty, the gold transferred to the claims conference facility in Washington, the documents in the archives where they were doing what documents are supposed to do, serving as evidence that something happened and that someone cared enough to preserve it. The obligation had passed from Walter to the ground to Daniel to Anna to the courts and the organizations and the families who were still in the process of receiving what had waited for them. The chain was long. The links were sometimes broken and sometimes repaired, and sometimes the next link was not put in place for a decade, and then someone plowed a field and found the chain still there, intact, waiting for the work to continue. Daniel Croft sat at his grandfather's kitchen table in his grandfather's farmhouse on the best 40 acres in Kingfisher County and let the work continue around him. The banknote was paid. The farm would stand. The families were being reached, one by one, through the slow mechanisms of law and documentation and the patient work of people who had decided that this mattered enough to see through. He had opened the gate on a Tuesday morning in April when the mathematics of his life left him no other direction. The rest was still being built, and the building was good work, and there was enough of it ahead to last as long as it needed to last. Stories like this remind us that starting over is terrifying, but it is always possible. If you or someone you love is facing a total reset right now, whether from a divorce, a loss, or a financial disaster, you need a plan. Scan the QR code on your screen or click the link below to get the Phoenix Blueprint for just $17. It gives you the exact steps you need to take in the first 48 hours and a 90-day plan to get your independence back. Thank you for watching.